Hi there, I'm Tavo, and this is my journey to create a 3D VTuber from scratch for the very first time. I started making videos in VR chat using avatar bases, pre-made models, retextured to look like my characters. Yet after spending so much time in this community and seeing your amazing creations, I decided that it's finally time to dive into 3D art and make something of my own. Thing is, I know it's not going to be easy. But seriously, why is it difficult? What type of work goes into making a VTuber? Let's try it out. Now, I'm not completely new to 3D software. I've used the program Blender before. However, it's always been really simple models, like these cool shades, are building onto existing bases. A character is still far bigger than anything I've worked on before. I needed a plan. A 2D reference should help keep things on track. Looking at my usual art, we already have a bit of a problem. These drawings are cartoony, stylized, they lack depth. We're making this for virtual reality, where you physically embody the avatar. I don't want a giant head or oversized hands. Now, I'm no expert in anatomy, but I do know we can measure the number of heads to avoid making it look too chibi. So I decided to explore some new designs. After a bit of sketching and line work, this is what I came up with. The drawing is about as exciting as a Family Guy still, but that's intentional. The character's standing in a T-pose. This will make it easier to model and rig later. Character sheets typically have multiple views, but here it's especially important to make sure it lines up in 3D. So we can import the reference into Blender and get started. With the reference in place, I looked into some character modeling videos and found there were two common methods: sculpting and box modeling. Sculpting is exactly what you're thinking of, except the clay is virtual. You push, pull, and pinch material to shape a model. This could be an amazing option if you've got that traditional art experience. I do not. Alternatively, there's box modeling. Here you start with a simple shape, then build onto it by extruding, slicing, and moving different parts. Box modeling felt more controlled and approachable, so I decided to go that route. Even though I had some idea of 3D modeling, I wasn't sure where to start or where the different parts of a character fit together. In fact, I was starting to get big flashbacks to making a 2D VTuber for the first time.
One of the hard things about making a VTuber is that you're expected to foreshadow and draw things a certain way when you already don't know what you're doing.
Man, did all my old videos sound like that? Anyway, modeling felt tedious and I had no idea how to fit everything together. Clearly, I was missing something. I found one tutorial series helped immensely. Modeling for Animation by Dicko. No, this isn't a sponsor, the videos are free on YouTube. Seeing someone block out a character while also explaining their reasoning helped immensely. Our avatar needs to move and deform, so we need to make patterns that hold their shape even when bent and twisted. Topology is the structure of all the little points, lines, and faces that build your 3D model. It's an entire area of study, but for right now, let's just focus on what matters for characters. In this case, we want to model in quads, or four-sided polygons. Modeling in quads makes it easy to slice with loops, subdivide into smaller squares, and deform evenly. With the help of the tutorial and my reference, I managed to block out the character for the first time. I started with the torso and built out the arms and legs from there. Notice that extra geometry on the elbow and knees to help prevent pinching. Wow, I actually implemented something I learned from YouTube Shorts. Holy shit. Everything is symmetrical here, so we can turn on a mirror and work from one side. Since Tavo is not human, I had to improvise with what I learned for the hips and knees. I wanted things to be a bit more smooth, so I started working with a modifier called Subdivision Subsurface. This sounds complicated, but it basically smooths out your model by dividing all the quads from before. The more detailed our model is, the more processing power it takes to display. So we don't want to make it too complex that it lights our friends' computers on fire. I set a limit of about 40,000 tries for the base model, so there's some wiggle room for adding clothes and keeping a good performance rating in VR chat. In retrospect, I think it was a bit high, but it could be a lot worse. Throughout this process, I uploaded my work to a site called Mixamo to test it out. This uses an algorithm to quickly set up your model for animation. This is not going to be the final result, but as a quick and dirty movement test, it was really encouraging to visualize how my character might look. When it came time to work on the hands though, look, all I'm gonna say is ask any artist, hands are hard. Plus, these are not hands. They're big bappers that still somehow have 5 fingers. Because while most cartoons will chop off a finger to make it easier to animate, I like having all my fingers in VR. Even with all of this work, my character still looked like a blocky gray alien, so it was time to focus on the head. It was a bit tricky figuring out the muzzle shape, but I had more of a flow going at this point. I extended the muzzle, opened the maw, make it easier to put teeth and tongue in. These are separate objects, allowing me to move them around for later lip syncing. Moving up on the face, we have the eyes. One of the most critical parts on a model, but really tricky to get right. After testing the water with spherical eyes, I decided to try a stylized approach. Both of my previous models used this method, and it's pretty common among anime and cartoon characters. We're gonna spoil the magic a little bit here. First, you shape an empty eye socket, and then place a floating iris inside. The illusion isn't quite there yet because of the shading, but don't worry, we'll fix that later. This is also where I added the first texture to the model. Previously, I'd just been applying colored materials, which is super basic, but really inefficient. I'll talk more about textures and materials later. It'll all come together when we get that toon shader on. At this point, I'd come a long way. Doing research, making a new design, learning new modeling techniques. I finished the entire body, but I won't lie, it still looked pretty rough. Doubt started to creep in, and I worried that I wasted so much time on a model that I didn't want to wear. I sent some progress pictures to friends and avatar creators. Some were encouraging and offered some advice, but also something unexpected. Sometimes things don't turn out the way you plan, and I wasn't alone in feeling this way. It's part of the learning process. Little by little, I started making adjustments to push things in the right direction, and it helped a lot. I still didn't have the best hands and wasn't sure how to translate Tavo's funky ears into 3D, but things were back on track, and I thought it was about time to do my first real rig test. In order to move our character, we need a rig to control it. This is an armature. It's kind of like a skeleton. It's made up of bones that move different parts of the model. There is a specific style for VR chat, so we should follow that game's expectations for a human-like character. Except I decided to be fancy and try to do something special. I found this tutorial for making digigrade legs, kind of like a fox or dog. The trick here is to copy the rotations of the human-like skeleton to different bones in a more animal-like skeleton. It felt doable at the time, but I'm sure this won't cause problems later. Anyway, the bones are now in place and we can move on to the next step. We now need to set what section of the model each bone controls. This is done through a process called weight painting. So every vertex or point on your model has a weight for how much a specific bone affects it. You could set all of these weights manually, but with weight painting, you can brush on large areas. Red is full effect, while fading to blue is less and less of an influence. Anything in between is kinda like a blend between bones. This all makes sense on paper, and for simpler models, it's not too bad. However, as the model increases in complexity, things are not so fun. There's a lot of tricky areas that you really have to focus on how you're blending between bones. And if your topology isn't set up right, it's never going to look good, so you have to go back and fix the topology before trying again. Overall, it took a lot of iteration and adjustment to get it looking somewhat decent. But now, with the rig in place, all the pieces were coming together, and it was finally time for our first in-game tests. To use the avatar in VR chat, we need to import it to the Unity game engine and set it up with their SDK. I exported the model and did the bare minimum setup for VR chat. After all this work, we can finally see it working in-game, and it still looked awful. The digigrade rig technically worked, but it felt weird to use. The full body proportions are terrible. It pulls up when you look down. Worst of all, my hands were completely crumpled and I have no idea how to fix them. It felt awful to be so far along and still stuck with something completely unusable. At this point, there was nothing left to do but lock in. Forget the fancy legs, we're keeping them simple. Move them back to a less extreme angle. While we're at it, gonna redo those terrible paws. Let's model a normal hand just to see where it's going wrong. Oh, look, Unity is fucking it up. Use that knowledge to completely remodel my own hand paws. Keep fixing things and fixing things and fixing things. It was just one thing going wrong after another, but I was determined to make it work. It still looks really unfinished, so let's fix that. You know how textures are kind of stretched out onto the surface of 3D models? That's all controlled by something called a UV map. Since Tavo is mostly solid colors, I just mapped everything besides the eyes to colored squares. This won't work for everyone, but I can compress this texture down to a very small size. It's lazy and efficient. Now Unity, the game engine, has a separate material system from Blender. Materials influence how light interacts with our 3D model. And if you've ever heard the term shader before, that's like a small program that's used with the material. Now for my model, I used a very popular shader called Pyomi and adjusted the material settings for an outline and toon shadows. With all of this done, the model finally started to feel decent for the first time, and we could get to the fun part. So while the armature controls the big animations like moving your arm, the smaller animations are done through blend shapes. These take the original mesh and deform it to a new shape. I had to make like 20 blend shapes for the vowel sounds. I'm gonna do face tracking later because that takes a lot more. For the face animations, I just decided to follow the MMD expressions guide. Not every face is here, but I figured since my character is already anime styled, yes, we do need the face that looks like an emoticon. This is your sign to add MMD blend shapes to your model. Most models have the bare minimum, but a couple more goes a long way. Keep with me, we're in the final stretch. I ended up saving the ears and tail for last, because I knew they'd be easy to separate and swap if needed. As for the ears, I tried a few variations before I settled on these. The front ears block both of the sides awkwardly. I think the backwards ears work better at highlighting the face, even if he looks a little bit more like a fox now. And of course, we have to add the fizz bones to the ears and tail. Finally, you guys really wanted the hoodie back on my last base. And I agree, Tavo looks plain without any clothes. Well, at least he's wearing a collar. But I see where you're coming from, so I got this new model a shirt. Yet I was really running out of time at this point. There's just one more thing to do. Yeah, so this project took way longer than I expected it to. However, it's to the point where I feel comfortable wearing the avatar. There's still plenty of things I want to do, like a better outfit, face tracking, and other tweaks. I don't know if this video makes it more or less intimidating to get started, but if you're curious about this stuff, now you know the steps involved. And no matter what creative endeavor you try, sometimes you just need to work through the awkward stages to get the results you're looking for.